about teacher evaluation being based on test scores, but most testing experts say that it's wrong to do this because test score gains and losses depend in large part on who happens to be in your class. Whether you have a good class or a bad class or a couple of difficult students, and on many factors beyond the teacher's control, such as poverty. The measures themselves that are now being used to say this is a merit measure, these measures are unproven, they're inaccurate, they're unstable. A teacher can get big test score gains one year and not the next. Good teachers will be wrongly identified as ineffective, and marginal teachers may be misidentified as effective. There's a huge margin of error. And relying on this methodology of your pay depends on test scores obviously will have negative effects, even if it could identify some teachers as more or less effective. It will promote teaching to test, it will narrow the curriculum, and teachers will be incentivized to avoid the students that have the greatest needs because they can't get the big gains from them. This will harm the neediest children. And it will furthermore, to do it right, you have to double the number of tests. You have to test in September again in May or June so that you know that you're testing that teacher's efforts. And even then, the scores will have a lot of inaccuracies. The whole theory of action behind this approach to evaluating teachers is simply bizarre. It assumes that if you put enough pressure on teachers, then students will work harder. Think about it. Won't it erode teachers' authority when the students realize that they can fire their teacher by withholding their effort? So while the corporate reformers want parents to be tiger moms, they want the teachers to be pushovers, living in fear of their students' opinions. Study after study has shown that the teacher is the most important factor in the school, but the influence of the teacher is dwarfed by the influence of the family, of the parents, and of the student himself or herself. If there's one consistent finding in social science of the past half century and more, it is that test scores are closely correlated with family income. Poverty affects achievement, so does affluence. If a student comes from a family where the parents are educated and have a good income, she begins school with important advantages. If a student comes from a home where no one speaks English, or from a neighborhood where crime and unemployment are common, the student begins school with significant disadvantages. Some students who are affluent will not succeed, and some students who grow up in poverty will succeed, but the odds are in favor of those with the economic advantages. Poverty does matter. In the United States, and this is, I think, it's like the elephant in the room that no one wants to talk about in this corporate reform movement, more than 20% of the children in this country are living in poverty, and that's a national scandal, but we don't talk about that. Poverty is obviously associated with homelessness and ill health and poor housing and high mobility and economic insecurity. All of these things affect students' motivation and attitude and intent. It's not blaming the victim to say that these are real problems in children's lives and that we ought to be doing something about it, not pretending it doesn't matter. Well, what about turning around failing schools? Well, of course, every state and every district should do whatever it can to improve schools when they have low scores. But the NCLB remedies, which Secretary Duncan is preserving, have not produced any results. And these remedies are turn the schools over to the state. Now, you've yet to find a state that knew how to improve a school, a state education department. Turn them into a charter school, which the results, as I mentioned, will be that about 17% will be better. And they, well, I don't even know if it's with the same kids. Privatize them, fire the staff, or close them. These are what they call turnaround strategies. The problem with this approach, we're now seeing more and more schools closed. Last week in New York City, we saw almost 24 put on the chopping block. Closing schools destroys social capital. And one of the most important aspects of school reform is having close relationships with the community, the parents, the teachers, the administration, the district leaders, people working together around the common needs of children. Closing schools destroys all of that social capital and sends kids off into a whole new situation where they don't know anyone, where their parents don't know anyone, and they're doing a do-over. That has produced no results. So the question comes up, what are the models for this turnaround strategy? Perhaps it's Chicago. But Chicago demonstrates that the model doesn't work. 7 years ago, Mayor Richard Daley and Superintendent Arne Duncan launched a program called Renaissance 2010. And they pledged that by 2010, Chicago would experience a renaissance. They closed low-performing schools and they replaced them with new schools, but it's 2011, and there has not been a renaissance. The Chicago Tribune reported that the scores of the new elementary schools are nearly identical to the city average, and the scores of the new high schools are below the already abysmal city average. The Consortium on Chicago School Research found that more than 80% of the students from the schools that closed were sent to other low-performing schools and made no progress. The business community produced a research review, and they concluded, quote, most of Chicago's students drop out or fail. The vast majority of Chicago's elementary and high schools do not prepare their students for success in college and beyond. Performance in the high schools, they said, was abysmal. So what does it mean to turn around school in this city and in some others? It means get rid of the low-performing students. That doesn't improve the school, and it does not improve the odds for children. Just today, I read online that the Independent Budget Office in New York City revealed that most of the schools that were closed, all of the schools that were closed in New York City last week, were schools that had unusually high concentrations of low-performing students. The new schools that open will do everything they can to avoid accepting those students, and they'll be bounced around to another low-performing school. Most of these so-called failing schools are actually schools with large numbers of low-performing students. What is the point of firing the staff? Why not help the staff? Why not help the kids? Why not, if a student doesn't teach English, doesn't speak English, closing the school will not help them learn English. So what do we need to do? We need to do what works. We need to do what's proven. We need to do what's cost-effective. We need high-quality early childhood programs that children start, so that children can start school ready to learn. Research shows there's a huge gap between children of poverty and children of affluence, even before the children start school. We need parent education programs so that parents can support their children and help schools do their job. We need reasonable limits on class size so that teachers are not overwhelmed, so that children get the attention that they need and deserve. Children need ready access to medical clinics so that they're healthy and ready to learn. We need more professionalism, not less. For teachers, there should be higher standards for entry into the profession, more support for those who enter teaching, good working conditions so that they remain teachers and continue to get better every year. And while I don't criticize Teach for America, it is totally not a solution to improving the profession. It's a nice program. It's gotten $150 million in the past 6 months, and it sends 8,000 teachers, not children, but young college graduates who agree to teach for 2 years. And this does not answer any problem that I can think of. We have a teaching force in this country of 4 million people, and 8,000 who agree to stay for 2 years does not solve any problems. As principals, we don't want people who have been recruited from outside education to become principals. We need master teachers to become principals. And as for superintendents, we need expert educators to become superintendents. We need better assessments, and I'm not talking here about better bubble tests, but more frequent writing assignments, more science projects, more comprehension, more history research papers, more actual activities in which children engage and can demonstrate that they actually know and understand what they have been exposed to. And there should be a balanced curriculum in every grade for every student, one that includes the arts and science and history and civics and geography and foreign languages and health and physical education, whether they're tested or not. And I hope that no one is tempted to test them all, as some of districts are doing now. We need this, first of all, because it's good education, but second, if that's not good enough to persuade people, this is what the highest performing nations in the world actually do for their children, not what we're doing. Every state, I believe, and this is my unique contribution, should have a process in which they send teams of expert educators to low-performing schools to diagnose the problems, to make recommendations, and then to stay involved to make sure that the school gets the help that it needs.